I have two suggestions. One is more practical than the other. The number one thing you can do, and it's the most simple and possibly obvious thing, is to read as much as you can and as widely as you can. I know that seems very simple, but I don't think you can be a writer without being a reader. I just don't think it's possible. I think you have to absorb as many different styles of writing as you can, and to figure out what do you enjoy, what do other people do well, what do you envy, what do you admire. And the more you read, the more you absorb, and the more you absorb, the more you're able to do it yourself. So, and I have met some people who want to write who then admit they don't read, and I can't fathom that. I can't understand. That's like saying you want to be a film director but you don't watch films. So that's my number one advice. Read. Just read as much as you can, and read all sorts of things that you don't think you might be interested in. Read different genres, read different styles. My second piece of advice is, if it's possible, is to find some way to connect with other writers. And you can do that online really easily. You can join all sorts of Facebook groups and follow writers on TikTok, Book Talk. And I don't use TikTok very much, but Book Talk is this whole online world full of thousands of writers. But if you can, in person, just over a year ago, I joined a local writing group. And they meet every week. In fact, we're meeting tonight to meet with other writers and take part in workshops and talk to one another about what everybody's writing, and hear other people reading their work is so invaluable. And firstly, because again, you can absorb other people's techniques and styles and see how they do it. But writing can be quite isolating, and it can feel like something that you really just do on your own, and you've got no idea whether you're doing it right or not.
Okay, everyone, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. I have a new friend in a country where apparently I'm from that I've never been to. How's that for an interesting beginning? My ancestors are from Scotland and moved to Ireland during the Great Potato Famine. So that's interesting. And my guest lives in Scotland, and I am so happy to have Matthew Keeley on with me today. Matthew is an author, he's a podcaster. So we're going to nerd out on podcasting as well today. Matthew, welcome to the podcast. It's so great to have you.
Oh, thank you so much, David. It's good to be here. Good to talk to you.
I've had a couple authors on from Scotland recently, and I'm just loving our conversation with Scottish authors. I don't know. They're just coming out of the woodwork, Matthew, and I'm really excited to have you on the podcast.
Oh, great. I think, Scotland seems to be a place for writing. I guess we have a history of literature, so there are a lot of people here who write all sorts of things, so I'm not surprised.
So I have a question from my wife, Jennifer. My wife and I watched the TV show series Outlander, and it's all based on Scottish history and things. And actually, our family was mentioned in the show, the Campbell family, which was interesting because I'm like, what are they going to say? But she loves that show, and I love the scenery as they film that show and where they take you and stuff. Curious, have you seen the show at all? Any thoughts on the show?
I haven't seen the show, but I do know a lot about it, and they film the indoor stuff. The studio where they film it is about 20 minutes from where I live. So I drive past the studios every week.
Okay, now my wife is going to be so excited to hear that. You're like, it's true. Yay. So, no, it's just a gorgeously filmed series, and they do a lot of work, and it seems like they put a lot of effort into capturing historical events as best they can. So, I love that. So I'm a huge history buff. So I would love to walk through the streets of Scotland and find some small little town. And I think we'll talk about that while we talk today about some of your inspiration for writing, but just find that little community that's off the beaten track and where no one really goes as tourists, but is like stuck in time. I would love to just do that. And you would be my tour guide if I come. You're going to be my tour guide. I will hunt you down, and we're going to spend some time together because you're a great person to talk to. So this can be a great interview, great episode.
Good. Looking forward to it.
Okay, so yes, you're in Scotland. You are a teacher as well, right?
Yes, I do about 20 different jobs, but one of the main ones is teaching. So I'm a high school English teacher, and I'm fortunate enough now I don't need to do that full time. So I teach part of the week, and I've been doing that for 15 years now.
Wow. That's great. How many students do you have in your class, usually?
I think the system's a bit different here from in the States. So I have 5 or 6 different classes. Most of them are about 30 students in a class.
Okay. All right. So is it a bigger school then?
It's a relatively big school, yeah, but in Scotland, that's kind of the case everywhere. Class sizes are around 30. It's a lot to contend with, but the kids are the best part of it, really. It's great to get to know them, so I do love working with them.
Awesome. What lights you up about being a teacher? What gets you out of bed in the morning and gets you excited to go to school and teach?
Well, it's nice to teach English because it's a little bit different from other subjects in so many ways. It is great to really just talk about stories a lot of the time, talk about storytelling, talk about language. One of the great moments in teaching English is finding that novel or that play or that short story or that poem and it doesn't happen for everyone all the time, but when you get one of those stories that does capture the attention of a young person and they really respond to it, it's a great moment, because I think we probably all have memories of English at school. People, I talk to adults all the time that say, oh, you're an English teacher. I remember this book I read at school. It's my favourite book. I know everyone's favourite subject isn't English, but I think most people do have memories of novels that they read at school, and if it's something that caught their attention, it just sticks with them forever. So it's nice to be at the point where you can create those moments with young people when you find that story that they realise, I love this, I'm always going to remember this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great moment, and I love teaching, and I love a teacher's heart. I think that's the one thing we need to celebrate more in education is the love and passion that teachers bring to the classroom every day. So thank you for being part of the future of these students' lives and their curiosity with reading and maybe writing, wherever that takes them. That's nice to know that you have a part to play in that. So that's amazing. So congratulations. Keep going. Don't stop.
Thank you.
I love it. Okay, so let's talk about your author journey a little bit. Tell me where this all started for you, where you thought, you know what, I got 5-10 minutes today. I'm going to become an author. I think I'm just going to just be a published author. I've decided. Is that how it all happened for you?
Yes and no. That's a big question. Mm-hmm. I always loved writing. When I was young, I did love writing stories, and I really like creating comic books. I created comic strips. My dad had a computer for work at home when I was young, which was quite unusual at that point. Most people didn't have computers at home. And I figured out how to make really rudimentary pictures and images. And so I would use that to create these little, I guess now they would be called graphic novels. So I was ahead of my time, but I always loved storytelling. I studied English literature at university. I went to the University of Glasgow, not far from where I am right now. And, I went into teaching and didn't then really think about writing very seriously for years. I just sort of thought that's something that other people do. That's not something I'll ever achieve. But then, oddly enough, there came a point maybe about 10 years ago. It sounds strange to say, but I really did almost overnight decide I'm going to write a novel. It was something that had always been in the back of my mind, and I think lots of people always say that one day I'll write a book. I know most people don't ever really take it seriously, but I don't know what prompted it, but I really did I remember one night in the flat I used to live in, I really sat in the living room late at night and decided I'm just going to do it. I'm going to write a novel. I have a couple of ideas. And from that night, I just started writing. I mean, in hindsight, it was a bit mad to start my writing journey by attempting a novel straight away. You know, I didn't go for short stories or poems or something small. I decided to go straight to a novel. But I stuck with it, and it took years. Eventually, I finished that novel that I decided to write that night, and it eventually got published, and I haven't stopped writing since then.
Wow. So were you in the habit of writing anything prior to that? Like documenting, journaling, anything at all?
I hadn't for years. Like I say, when I was young, I wrote stories, and I kept diaries in high school. But eventually it tailed off. By the time I got to university, I kind of did keep a diary, a journal still, but I wrote in it less and less often the older I got. But no, throughout most of my 20s, I didn't write at all. I just gave up on it. And again, I thought, this is a bit unrealistic. Who actually becomes a writer? And I didn't do anything about it. But yeah, eventually I just decided very suddenly, I'm going to do this. I'm going to pick it up again. And I went for it.
Any authors and writers that inspired you back in those early days that you were like, I like how this person approaches writing, and I like a little bit of how this person writes, and I'm going to maybe combine some of these and figure out my style based on some other authors out there?
I think so, yeah. Funnily enough, I probably didn't gravitate towards incredibly contemporary writers. I think in my last year of high school, I read, this is very sort of English teacher, typical answer, but I read The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, and I've read it several times since. It really stuck with me. I think I didn't really appreciate it as a 17-year-old. I didn't fully get it or relate to it, but it left this very clear impression on me that no other novel had left on me, because it was so honest and felt so genuine. I also love Margaret Atwood, so The Handmaid's Tale is probably my favourite novel. In fact, right beside me right now on my wall where I'm pointing, that no one can see, there is a framed picture of the cover of The Handmaid's Tale. I love Atwood's style. Another favourite author is Kazuo Ishiguro, who's written Never Let Me Go. Never Let Me Go is also one of my favourite novels. I realised I tend to gravitate towards first person narration. So all three of those examples I've just given are narrated by characters in first person. There's something about that complete creation of a character talking directly to the reader that just impresses me so much when it's believable. And I guess I always try and imitate that. I mostly write in first person, so it's something that I really enjoy.
See, that's interesting. Okay, so if you had the chance to have one of these three authors on your author podcast, they said yes, and they're sitting here on the camera with you right now, and you're talking first person, you're talking about how they've inspired you. What question, one single question, would you ask one of these authors sitting here with you right now if they were on your podcast as an inspiration to you as an author? What would you ask them?
Oh, that's a tough one. I would probably ask, this sounds like, this isn't a very specific question. This is this probably sounds a bit vague, but I really would just ask, how do you do it? How do you do it? I think one of the best signs of good writing, and that can be novel writing or screenplay writing, is when you read that book or you watch that film. For me, and your reaction at the end is, how did they do that? I wish I had done that. And that's the way I feel when I read The Handmaid's Tale, which I've read 5 times, or when I read Never Let Me Go, which I've read countless times, I just read it and think, how did they do this? I wish this could, why did I not do this? So that, I don't know if that's a clear question, but that is what I would ask. How did you come up with this?
Yeah.
And how did you create this voice? How did you make this character, how did you make this narrator sound like a real person?
Yeah.
And whatever they had to tell me, I would just completely absorb.
Okay, so now I'm going to do a little trick on you here. I'm going to spin the question back to you as my guest.
Okay.
All right. So now you get to answer your own question for me about how you write. See what I did? I see what I did there. So there we go. I set you up. So I'm sorry. Can you answer the same question for how you approach your writing? Because I'm sure there's listeners and fellow authors that have the exact same question about what you write. How would you answer that question yourself?
Sure. I'm acknowledging that it's a huge question, but for me, I'm a big planner. I know writers often divide themselves into camps of planners and pantsters, which means flying by the seat of your pants and making it up as you go along. I am not one of those. I am not a pantster. I have to plan fairly meticulously, whether that's novel writing, short stories, poetry, article writing. I can't really just sit with a blank page and see what happens. Generally, with novels, I spend weeks planning out every detail I can think of about the characters and planning out almost chapter by chapter what's going to happen. I don't feel like I can begin writing if I don't know where the end will be. Sometimes as I'm writing, I change things, and sometimes in the writing process you realise, oh, that plan I had for the original ending, I've just thought of something better. And that's fine. If you think of something better along the way, I change it. But I need an end point to begin. So that's my approach, is to plan meticulously. And I rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. I don't know of any, unless you're a genius, I don't know of any writers who can write 1 or 2 drafts and that's it. And I think that's probably a mistake. You know, as a teacher, I try and get that across to young people all the time, that 1 or 2 drafts is never enough. You need, and that's for anyone at any stage of writing, you need to reread and leave it for a while and come back to it. It's called writer's craft for a reason. It's like creating a sculpture where you pick away and you chip at things and you mold it over time. I think that's what you have to do with writing. You have to treat it meticulously, for me.
It's a great answer. See, you've answered your own question very, very well. I see the same thing in, like, for a comedian, for example, and they're creating a new routine. They'll go to a small little comedy club and they'll practice in front of a live audience and they'll see what works and what doesn't work. And then they go back and they work again on their project. Musicians do the same thing. We practice, we play, and we tweak and we come back at it. And it's always this thing. That's, again, kind of why I have the name Living the Next Chapter. You're always living it at every stage as you're working on your book and your novel or your craft. You're tweaking it. You're coming back to it. It doesn't just happen. It doesn't just fall in your lap and here's a novel. Thank you. And that's it. So it's something you really have to build and work on. So I love the answer. It's great. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about the novels that you have out there right now? Let's start with novel number 1 and tell people a little bit about it.
Yeah. Novel 1 is called Turning the Hourglass, and the simple idea at the core of it is the idea of ghosts. I had a thought one night. I thought, why do we assume that ghosts are remnants of people who died in the past? I thought, what if it's the opposite? What if ghosts are people who haven't even been born yet? What if ghosts are ripples back in time from the future? And that is where, that was the essence of Turning the Hourglass. So the story is set hundreds of years in the future, where time travel is possible, and historians use time travel to look back into the past and find out what happened. there are reasons in the novel why they don't actually know that much about the past. So they use time travel to go back, observe, record, study people, and sometimes they are seen when they go back to the past. They're spotted, and that's what ghosts are. If you see a ghost, you're actually seeing someone from the future. But that also implies, if you're seeing a ghost, and that's someone from the future, there must be a reason they've come back to look at you. You must be of some significance.
Ooh.
That means someone wanted to visit you.
Oh.
So this story centers around that idea.
That is captivating. Okay, I have to ask, if you were a ghost and you could travel back in time, where would you go?
I would either want to go completely prehistoric and go back, to dinosaurs and look at the Earth as it was before there were even humans around, or go back to something kind of medieval, somewhere in the UK. I want to go back to old castles, and I want to go back to Shakespeare and the Tudors and see if it compares to the way we see these things in film and TV. That's what I would want to see. Is it as we thought it was, or was it even worse?
Amazing. Okay, so when did Turning the Hourglass come out?
That came out in 2019. And it was published by a publisher called Black Rose Writing, who actually are based in Texas, strangely.
There you go.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, so that was your first novel ever. Is that like your favorite novel being your first, or is it just one of the many to come?
It's not my favorite, but it's probably the one that I'll always be most proud of, because it was the first, and it happened completely out of determination and perseverance and grit. So I'll always be proud that it actually happened and that I made it happen. My favourite novel is my most recent, which I can tell you about now if you want me to tell you.
I would love to hear about it. Yes.
My most recent novel is called The Stone in My Pocket. The Stone in My Pocket might appeal to people who like things like Stranger Things or The Perks of Being a Wallflower. And those two seem very different, but somewhere in the middle where they meet might come my novel. The Stone in My Pocket is set in 1999 in a Scottish village and centres on a teenager called Nathan. Nathan won't talk to his own parents, but believes he can talk to ghosts. Again, there's a ghost theme amongst my novels. It's not deliberate, but there's obviously something in my subconscious that wants to come out. The novel kicks off with Nathan hearing a voice coming from his back garden, an inexplicable voice, and it leads him on this journey to explore mediumship and spirituality and the afterlife with the help of the owner of the local bookshop.
Nice. And I think we talked about this, I kind of alluded to this at the beginning of our episode, but this book in particular, this novel was featured around a certain community that is around you, where it's, can you fill in the blanks on that? Because I think that's interesting too.
Yeah, the novel is kind of semi-autobiographical. So I spent a lot of time growing up in a little village in Scotland. Every weekend, my parents would take me off to a caravan that we had. So we spent weekends in this little Scottish town. It's beautiful, it's idyllic, and it imprinted itself on my mind. I mean, I think as a teenager at times I felt a bit too cool for it and I resented it, but now as an adult I think, you know what, I should have appreciated that a bit more. Actually, those weekends were lovely. And so the novel takes aspects of some of my memories in that little town and created this world for Nathan, who is, I suppose, a version of me. So
that would be one of the communities that I would want you to take me to. Yes. If I come to Scotland, you're going to take me there because I want to walk there and feel that as well. I think that's why I was alluding to at the beginning, because that's I love a place in time and a location, because then that shows in your writing right?
Yeah.
You're going to bring out elements of and take us there as readers. So that we are walking with you in that setting, right? And you can explain it so well because it's not coming from your head. It's coming from an actual location where you've been. So that's amazing.
I hope so. I hope that comes across. Readers have been very positive in their feedback to me, and I've talked about really getting a sense of the place. So I guess it's been successful.
So tell me a little bit about some of the feedback you've had on your novels. As a new author, someone listening to our podcast, you're out there, you're writing your book, you're crafting something, and you're like, I don't even know if anybody's really going to like this. I love it as an author, but will anybody even read this novel that I'm creating? Will anybody get the thing about the ghosts and the time travel? I love it, but maybe nobody's going to like this. Are you getting responses from people on your novels? And I'd love to kind of hear some of the feedback that you've had.
Yeah, I've had, luckily, really positive reviews and feedback, online, on Amazon. There are lots of nice reviews, which is great to read. It's especially nice when it's people you don't know. So reviews from strangers are the best because they feel a little bit more unbiased.
Yeah.
It's the nicest thing about, or the most interesting thing about feedback from the novels is when people ask questions I hadn't even considered, or when people interpret things from the novels in ways I hadn't intended, but that doesn't make those interpretations any less valid. So the Stone in My Pocket, for example, is somewhat ambiguous in certain areas. Throughout the novel, Nathan believes there's a ghost haunting him and believes that there are ghosts trying to communicate with him and that he has a gift that he's nurturing to be able to speak to the dead. The readers can decide whether or not that's real. I offer suggestions about whether or not it's real as the novel goes on, but I kind of deliberately left some of it open-ended. So it is very interesting to hear people tell me what they think of Nathan and what they think of what he experienced in the novel. It tells you so much about a person when they tell you, here's what I thought was happening in the novel. I think that's why we love literature, and that's, as an English teacher and as a student of English, that's what I love about it the most, is that actually when you read a text and discuss what you think it was about, you're discussing yourself as much as you're discussing the text. You're actually revealing a bit about your personality and your background and your experiences and your values. That's what I love about discussing poems and novels and plays and short stories. You're actually finding out about your fellow audience members and your fellow readers. Sorry, that answer went off on a bit of a tangent, but I hope it was relevant.
No, I love it. And one thing I'm doing here in the background while you're chatting is I'm looking at your Amazon listing right now, and some of the reviews are amazing on this book, on this novel in particular. Someone who goes by the name Smiler, they wrote unputdownable. Unputdownable. That's a good word. As the English teacher,
that's a good.
Is that okay? Would that pass on an exam? Unputdownable.
That's new words. Neologisms are fine with me.
Okay.
Especially when it's saying something nice about me.
Okay. All right. Yeah. They go on to say, great read, hooked right from the start, highly recommended. And then Amy S. says it's an addictive read. Been meaning to read this for a while, and as soon as I started, I couldn't put it down. FICO says, love this book, and it made a great gift, too. Wonderfully written, coming-of-age story, simple and truthful and fully engaging. Oh, the ending chapter was both painful and hopeful at once. We won't go too far there. Captures the reality of growing up without the over-heightened drama one might expect or even enjoy from similar kind of novels. Yeah. So there you go. We're getting people responding. You're a podcaster on top of being an author, and getting anyone to respond to anything that you create, podcasting, writing a book, when somebody takes the time to actually leave you a review and give you thoughts and that kind of response, what does that do for you?
it's so lovely. It's really nice to get feedback. And yeah, when someone goes out of their way to actually write a review somewhere online, it's very validating. And in a sort of egotistical way, I think it's unavoidable that writers and creators are looking for validation, no matter what we might say. That's an element of it, is that you're writing because you want an audience, you want a readership. So to hear it's affected people in some way, it does make it feel like it's worth it.
Right. Yeah, it's a good feeling, and I encourage anyone listening to an author podcast, and you're listening to an author guest talk about their books, go out and leave them a review. Like, let them know that what they're doing means something here in the world, because that information gets back to the author, and it does spur them on and encourage them to continue writing and continue to produce great novels. So I encourage everyone listening to continue to give reviews and be helpful in that way. It does mean something. It really does.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. So, okay. So that's the two novels. I know my wife in particular is completely hooked on that style of writing and that style of a novel. So I see two books that I'm going to need to buy right away for my wife. She'll love those. And again, going back to Outlander, she's got a connection with Outlander. So she's going to love the fact that this comes from you. And after hearing this episode, again, that's another great thing about having a podcast, Matthew, is hearing the author's voice and then purchasing the book and then reading it with new information directly from the author. And then as you open the book, you feel like you're already on the inside club, like you already know something that no one else knows before you even read the first word.
Yeah.
Because we've heard from the author himself, right? And that I find to be a little advantage, inside club type thing that happens by listening to an author. So we'll have new listeners to the podcast, but also new readers coming to your way just based on our conversation. So I love that.
Yeah, awesome. That's perfect. I think you're right. I'm lucky enough that I have had the chance to interview quite a few writers. There's a book festival in Glasgow called the I Write Festival, happens every year. And at last year's festival, I was a sort of chair for an author talk. So I got to interview 3 debut authors, and I read all of their novels, and making the connection between the actual human beings and the novels that I'd read, it really added a whole other element to it. It helped bring them to life, to meet the person that created these ideas and get to know them a little bit and ask them questions. It created an even stronger connection with the books. So and even with social media now, it's to connect with an author on social media and get to know them a little bit more. It can add something else to the experience of reading a story, I think.
So Matthew, what is the secret for an author to improve and grow and develop their craft? Any words of wisdom for a new author listening right now, and they don't have their first novel or book out yet, but they want to improve, they want to get better every day? What do you think the secret is to getting better?
I have 2 suggestions. One is more practical than the other. The number one thing you can do, and it's the most simple and possibly obvious thing, is to read as much as you can and as widely as you can. I know that seems very simple, but I don't think you can be a writer without being a reader. I just don't think it's possible. I think you have to absorb as many different styles of writing as you can, and to figure out what do you enjoy, what do other people do well, what do you envy, what do you admire. And the more you read, the more you absorb, and the more you absorb, the more you're able to do it yourself. So, and I have met some people who want to write who then admit they don't read, and I can't fathom that. I can't understand. That's like saying you want to be a film director but you don't watch films. So That's my number one advice. Read. Just read as much as you can, and read all sorts of things that you don't think you might be interested in. Read different genres, read different styles. My second piece of advice is, if it's possible, is to find some way to connect with other writers. And you can do that online really easily. You can join all sorts of Facebook groups and follow writers on TikTok, Book Talk. And I don't use TikTok very much, but Book Talk is this whole online world full of thousands of writers. But if you can, in person, just over a year ago, I joined a local writing group, and they meet every week. In fact, we're meeting tonight. And luckily it's 5 minutes from where I live, but even if it was a little bit further, I would go to it to meet with other writers and take part in workshops and talk to one another about what everybody's writing, and hear other people reading their work is so invaluable. And firstly, because again, you can absorb other people's techniques and styles and see how they do it. But writing can be quite isolating, and it can feel like something that you really just do on your own, and you've got no idea whether you're doing it right or not. So to just talk to other writers and realize, oh, they feel what I feel. Oh, they have the same doubts that I have. It's really encouraging, and it can give you a little boost to keep going. So if you can join some sort of writing group, whether that's in person, or there are writing groups online that people can join on Zoom. Yeah. I think that's been one of the best things that I've done.
Okay. And then before we go, Matthew, what about promotion for your book, your novel? Any information, any suggestions from your perspective? I love having guests on podcasts, having authors on, because we get to hear your voice and connect with you as a person. So that's one advantage. Anything other than being on a podcast that you find helps you to promote your novels?
Apart from social media, which seems to be the sort of obvious thing, but the thing that's necessary, I think I always find the most effective ways to promote your work is anything you can do in person. So I find online stuff can be a little bit like shouting into the void and being lost amongst a sea of tens of thousands of other authors. But anything you can do in person, like I've visited local reading groups. I've visited high schools to talk to students. I've visited book festivals, taken part in open mic nights, anything where you're actually physically in front of other people. And like we said, you can read your work, but then you also get to talk to people and they get to know you a little bit. I always find that's the best way to make connection with readers, is to actually see them face to face or online. I do a lot of online open mic events, and to actually see other people and they see you and they get to know you a little bit. I find that's quite an effective way to promote your work, is to make a human connection. I think it's better to make a connection with a handful of people in a room than to try and connect with 1 million people online. Yeah. So that's my experience.
The other thing you can do as an English teacher is make it a required read for your class. You can sell 30 books right there, right?
You could be sneaky and do that, yes.
Not that we have ever done it or thought of it, but yes. Has any of your students ever read your work?
Yeah, luckily, a lot of students ask about, they know that I'm a writer, so lots of them do ask questions about it. The school librarian in the school where I work has been kind enough to buy copies of my novel, and without me asking her, I would like to point out. Yes. So there are copies of my book in the school library, and sometimes, kids at school will say, "Oh, I bought your book on Amazon. I bought your book in the bookshop." So I guess they probably think it's just quite exciting to know somebody who wrote a novel, and it's nice when they do that.
And when they hand in their papers for grading and they've purchased the book and love the book, does it sway you at all? I'm joking. That you give them a better grade, so yes, all the students,
Yeah, buy a book and you get bumped up a grade.
There you go. Unofficially, off the record, yes. Awesome. Matthew, this is great. Before we go, The other thing we talked about during the episode is you have a podcast. Can you tell us about your podcast? Because the people listening right now are like, I need more Matthew in my life. I'd like to continue listening to Matthew. Where do I go? And the great thing is you can click right from our show notes right to Matthew's podcast and hear about this amazing podcast that I'm enjoying myself. Can you tell us a little about your podcast?
Yes, I host a podcast called The Trader. The Trader is a podcast dedicated to one of the most popular new TV shows around the world, because there are different versions of it. There is a TV program called The Traitors. The Traitors is a reality competition TV show full of deception and betrayal and backstabbing and secrecy and lots of money to be won. There's a UK version, a US version, an Australian version, a Dutch version. So my podcast looks at each episode of the show, and I've had guests on who have been contestants in the program. So I've been interviewing players of the show and asking them all about their experience and getting behind the scenes information. So yes, the Trader podcast. If you have seen the show or if you like the idea of the show, you should check it out.
Nice. Are there any ghosts on the show or anybody with a stone in their pocket at all?
There are only the ghosts of contestants who've been eliminated.
Okay. All right. I didn't know if we want to tie it back into the novel. So there you go. I love that. So yes, to everyone, please go check out the podcast. Like, follow, share, do all that as well to help Matthew as he grows his podcast. Matthew, I love it. Before we go, one last thing. For a new author again, word of wisdom, something that you wish somebody had told you before you wrote novel number 1. That little bit of inspiration that would have really helped you at the beginning. What would you say to somebody listening today that, again, hasn't written a single thing, but they're inspired by your story and they say, tonight's the night I'm going to start? What would you tell them to get going and encourage them?
My one magical piece of advice would be everybody thinks they're terrible at some point. So I don't think you can be a creator without looking at your own work or listening to your own work and thinking, oh my goodness, that's awful. Everyone thinks it. Everyone reads their work or listens to their music or looks at their painting and thinks, this is so bad. Why did I do this? That's normal. You have to just push past that. Once you get past the point of thinking, I'm terrible and I can't do this, you will come back and you will have moments where actually you read something you wrote, or you look at something you painted, or you listen to a piece of music you created and you think, you know what, that's not that bad. Actually, that's pretty good. Actually, I'm quite proud of that. So that's my advice. Beautiful.
Matthew, so where does everyone find you? You mentioned the books are available on Amazon, but how do people connect with you? Where are you most active in this online world?
I am most active probably on Instagram these days. My Instagram and Twitter handle are the same, and it's at Matthew J. Keeley. I also have a writer page on Facebook, and it's simply Matthew Keeley Writer. And then there is the podcast as well.
Beautiful. Thank you, Matthew, for making time. And again, I love having Scottish authors on the podcast. A place that is home to me, but I've never been there, and I would love to come and visit someday. So we'll have to go to that little tiny town and community and walk there and reconnect. So thank you, Matthew, for being part of the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thank you for subscribing and following. And you're listening this far in the podcast, so you are my best friend. I'm sorry, but you are now my best friend. So welcome. Nice to meet you. Thank you for being here. LivingTheNextChapter.com has a link on the website to our Facebook group. Are you on Facebook? Probably. You can go there and you can actually interact with our guests. You can talk to them. You can hear more about their journey, about their books. You can speak to them directly. You don't need me. You can come right over to livingthenextchapter.com, click on our Facebook link to our community. You can talk to other listeners of the podcast from around the world who are on Facebook. And, again, speak with our guests. Don't you want to speak to the guests you just heard from? Yeah, you can do that on Living the Next Chapter. Go over there. There's links to our Facebook group, and you're welcome to join. Thanks for listening.
Mindshift Power Podcast, the podcast for teenagers and those who work with them. There's a huge problem in America today. There's a very large disconnect between teenagers and the adults who work with them. I'm looking to bridge that gap with real, raw, honest conversation, not held back by the chains of political correctness. You cannot solve a problem you do not understand. Want to understand teenagers today? Listen to this podcast. This podcast is for teens in the U.S. and Canada. To learn more, go to fatimabay.com/podcast or just look for Mindshift Power Podcast on any listening platform. I look forward to you being a faithful listener.